Israel and Iran trade strikes as President Trump claims military operations are ahead of schedule and that Iran is begging for a deal to end the war. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky offers drone expertise to Gulf nations in exchange for help fighting the war against Russia.
South Korea is planning a $17 billion wartime supplementary budget in response to the prolonged Middle East conflict as the war in Iran pushes up energy prices. The government says the package will support small and mid-sized firms and vulnerable households while expanding fuel tax cuts and stabilizing domestic fuel prices. Much of South Korea's imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping route that has been effectively shut. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim says he has spoken to the leaders of Iran, Egypt, Turkey and other regional countries and said Malaysian vessels are now being allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. In a televised address, he thanked Iran's president for allowing the passage of Malaysian ships. He added that Malaysia's government would maintain oil price subsidies but is taking steps to weaken the impact of supply disruptions, including reductions in the monthly allocations of subsidized fuel. Meanwhile, Australia's Prime Minister is trying to reassure the public there about the supply and availability of fuel as prices soar and more fuel stations in the country report selling out. And the government maintains that panic buying is the major cause of both spikes and shortages.
Times it leads with an update on Donald Trump's deadline extension for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz from 5 to 10 days.
Trump throws our toys out of pram is the headline on the Metro, which focuses on the US president's comments about the UK's aircraft carriers being toys in comparison to US assets.
Welcome to Newsday. US President Donald Trump has again delayed threatened strikes on Iranian power plants, claiming talks with Tehran are, quote, going very well. The president said the pause on hitting energy plants would now last until the 6th of April, claiming the delay came at Iran's request. At his first cabinet meeting since the war, he warned the US would be Iran's worst nightmare if it doesn't agree to a peace deal. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the Pentagon is considering sending another 10,000 troops to the Middle East. Iranian state media says Tehran has responded to the US's 15-point plan and is waiting a reply. Meanwhile, Israel says it killed an Iranian Navy chief overseeing the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the overnight operation yet another example of cooperation between the US and Israel.
Tonight at 6, the US will be done in a couple of weeks. That's according to its top diplomat when asked about the progress of the war against Iran.
We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them, and we can achieve them without any ground troops, without any.
Here, more than 150 pence a litre for petrol for the first time in nearly 2 years, pushing up the cost for motorists of getting away this Easter. We have a special report on the impact of the bombing on the residents of Tehran. Good evening. America's top diplomat has spoken of being done in a couple of weeks when asked about the progress of the war in the Middle East. Marco Rubio, who was at the G7 meeting of foreign ministers in Paris, said this was not going to be a prolonged war and that the US could achieve its objectives without any troops on the ground. Iran says 2 nuclear-related facilities have been hit, but they say there's been no release of radioactive material. Here, the price of petrol has risen over 150 pence a litre as a result of the conflict. More on that in a moment, but first here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
This war is almost 4 weeks old and there's no let-up in the fighting. Emergency workers here in Tehran picking through the aftermath of the latest attack, rescuing the living, removing the dead. These are the latest US images of missile strikes that commanders say are hitting Iran's ability to project force outside its borders. But it's not clear if these attacks are helping Donald Trump achieve his wider aims. Amid reports of a further 10,000 US troops being deployed, America's top diplomat was in France, expressing confidence his country's war aims could be met in the next couple of weeks.
We're going to destroy their Navy, we're going to destroy their Air Force, and we are going to significantly destroy their missile launchers so they can never hide behind these things to get a nuclear weapon. We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them, and we can achieve them without any ground troops, without any.
But America's problem is that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and is planning to charge tolls on international shipping. So for now, the US is pausing attacks on Iran's civilian energy to allow time for talks. So what do both sides want? Well, much of the detail is not public, but this week it seems the US sent Iran a 15-point plan to be discussed during a 30-day ceasefire. The US wants, first of all, restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, with facilities shut down and UN inspectors allowed in. It wants to limit the range and number of Iran's ballistic missiles and end Iran's support for regional militias. The US, of course, wants the Strait of Hormuz reopened. And in return, Iran would get sanctions lifted and help for its civilian nuclear power. Iran, however, has its own demands, a 5-point plan, according to state media. It wants an end to all US and Israeli attacks and guarantees of no future aggression. It wants compensation for damage caused during the war. It seeks international recognition of its control over the Strait of Hormuz. And some Iranian officials have even talked of seeking the closure of US bases in the region. The gap between both sides is vast. And remember, there's a third country in this war with its own agenda, Israel. And it sent troops into Lebanon to attack Hezbollah fighters. The IDF claiming this was a weapons bunker the pro-Iranian militia had located in a school. Near Paris, G7 foreign ministers met to discuss the war, calling on Iran immediately to restore the safe and toll-free freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. And on the north coast of that seaway, life goes on, a child at play, while the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas burns. James Landale, BBC News.
Well, as you heard here, petrol has risen above 150 pence a litre. Emma Simpson is here with me. And Emma, this is for the first time in nearly 2 years.
Yes, the RAC calling this an unwelcome milestone for motorists today. But I think it's worth zooming out and looking at what fuel prices have done over the last few years. We've got a chart to show you. Now, if you look at the start of that graphic there, you can see actually a bigger spike after war in Ukraine broke out. Then things fell back and it's been fairly steady, and then that dramatic rise just in the last month. But as you say, the average litre of unleaded petrol is now 150p. The blue line diesel is even more. Now, the chairman of ASDA was asked about the current situation today, and he said he'd seen a significant increase in fuel sales. So people are filling up more. Now, that's not surprising, Rita, if you're worried about rising prices. But for retailers, selling fuel is normally really predictable, but it's got a bit unpredictable, harder to manage. And he said that ASDA was seeing some temporary shortages. Now, to be clear, what he meant by that is they were seeing a small number of individual pumps at a small number of forecourts temporarily out of use, but these were being refilled within a day. No overall issues of supply. Stocks remain the same, but it's just that volumes are going up a bit. Now, I asked Mr. Layton about profiteering. Given all the concerns about the government on this, he said this is not the case, and instead of government pointing the finger at anyone else, it ought to point the finger at itself, because of course what he was getting at is the government is getting more tax revenues when the prices go up because of more duty.
Emma, thank you very much. Emma Simpson there. Well, for the last month, Iran has been under sustained attack by both Israel and the US. Israel has dropped more than 3,500 munitions on the capital, Tehran, and hit 38 police stations and bases used by Iran's militia. That's according to data examined by the BBC. Many are in residential areas. The US says it's carried out more than 10,000 attacks across the country. The BBC has gained rare access inside Tehran. Here's our exclusive report from Nawal Al-Maghafi.
Amongst the rubble, a mother in agony. For 3 days, she's been waiting for news of her daughter. She's scared of the dark, she cries. These rescue efforts are too late. 3 days ago, this neighborhood of Resalat, eastern Tehran, was attacked by Israeli forces. They told the BBC they were targeting a besieged compound, a militia that's part of the Revolutionary Guard. We've confirmed this building was indeed used by the besieged, but that day 3 other residential buildings were also struck in quick succession. On satellite imagery taken a few days after the strike, we clearly see that all 4 have been obliterated. This man, who didn't want to share his name, has lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years. His home was badly damaged. Our analysis shows that apartments as far as 65 meters away were heavily damaged. Residents told us 40 people were killed here. So what caused such devastation? Military experts told us this type of bomb is being used in Tehran by the Israeli Air Force. The Mark 80 series are carried by jets and are often fitted with precision guidance systems. The damage in this case appears to be consistent with the largest bomb, weighing 2,000 pounds. Some unexploded ones have been photographed in Tehran. Another deadly attack. An Israeli strike on the police station in Nilafar Square. 20 people were killed. This shopkeeper was there as it happened. In January, thousands in both Risalat and Nilafar joined nationwide protests. Like elsewhere in Iran, they were brutally crushed. Across the country, at least 7,000 people were killed. The US and Israel say by targeting police and besieged bases, they're preparing the ground for the Iranian people to overthrow the government.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations.
Resalat and Nilafar are 2 of 38 police stations and besieged bases we've identified that have been hit in Tehran alone. Many are surrounded by densely populated areas. In the virtual silence imposed by the government's internet blackout, images like this are rare but vital to understand how this war is being waged. Still, they don't tell us how this will end for the Iranian people. Nawal Al-Maghafi, BBC News.
While that report was playing, we were showing you some live pictures of yet more strikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. And it comes on the day when the United Nations has said that there is no safe place in Lebanon anymore, not even in Beirut, for civilians to find safety. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps claim they have turned back 3 ships that were trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. They say the route is closed to vessels travelling to and from ports linked to its enemies. That's having an enormous impact on the price of oil and gas, with more acute shortages now being felt in Asia. In India, one of the world's largest crude oil importers, the government has slashed duty on petrol and diesel from 13 rupees per litre to 3 rupees per litre. That will cost the government over $16 billion for the year. In Japan, 90% of oil imports come from the Middle East. Companies there are already buying oil at $140 to $200 per barrel, and they say they have about 250 days' worth of oil in reserve. In Australia, the government's urging people not to panic buy. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, told reporters the fuel supply remains secure, but hundreds of petrol stations have been running dry. And in the Philippines, diesel and petrol prices have more than doubled since the war began. The Philippines is now in a state of national energy emergency. Let's speak to Alan Gelder, Senior Vice President of Refining, Chemicals and Oil Markets at Wood Mackenzie, a research and consulting firm that specialises in energy, natural resources and commodities. Alan Gelder, thank you very much. You've been waiting very patiently to speak to us, and we do appreciate it. How great is the risk of this current situation becoming the new normal?
It all depends upon how much traffic comes through the Strait of Hormuz. This is the biggest energy shock we've ever had, bigger than the Arab oil embargo in the 1970s in terms of you look at lost supply. It's how long does the straits remain blocked to traffic? That's very difficult to determine given the military situation.
How can governments mitigate against it?
You see, your prior report mentioned various things. One is trying to insulate the consumer from the escalation in prices, because we've seen a jump in crude prices, and then particularly diesel and jet, which we import from the Middle East. So there's the element of covering the price shock. There's prices increases in gas, which has impacts on electricity prices. The challenge is how long this lasts, because the longer the straits are closed, the more acute the shortages become, and then we need to change behaviours to reduce our demand. And you mentioned various things that were going on in various places, but we need to start seriously thinking about how much energy we consume and whether we need to. We do have strategic stocks as a result of the 1970s oil embargo, which gives us a couple of months of buffer. Hopefully, we don't need to fully draw on those reserves.
What can individuals do?
What can individuals do? Be more energy efficient. Think if you do need the journey, and at the moment, don't panic buy, because that would that would create all the wrong signals. We've got plenty of supply for the next few months, but it's just be more thoughtful about the energy that you're using.
When you say we, you mean the UK?
It's a UK, European-wide problem. It's arguably inverse COVID. So at that point from 2020, oil demand on average was 10 million barrels a day below 2019. You think how much the world was restricted in terms of its movement. That's the amount of oil that we've lost. So if that loss is prolonged, then that's the degree of mobility that needs to be reduced for supply to match the demand to match supply. At the moment, that would be done through high prices, which implies very high prices. We hope we don't get to that situation.
Saudi Arabia is trying to get oil out of the west coast towards Asia, but what risks does that attract?
The risks it attracts is it comes out of the west coast and then goes down to the Red Sea through the narrow straits that about a year ago, those straits were largely closed to traffic because the Houthi rebels, get my teeth in, were attacking shipping. So the risk is the tankers that they've got lined up to refill, supply the refineries in Asia that are running short, because that's where most of the crude is Middle East. If those straits become blocked or very hazardous, that just exacerbates the current situation and reduces the impact of the flows that they are putting through their west coast into the Red Sea.
Alan Gelder from Wood Mackenzie, thank you very much for talking to us.